Hey guys, so I was thinking how I would present my end of year favorite movies list, and I figured doing it in video form is probably an interesting idea and it would be more fun to watch than to just, read. And so I decided to make this video, and I'm gonna split my list up into genres, specifically horror, sci-fi, because those are the genres I particularly care about. So, okay, this is the horror list, so let's go. Coming in at number 10 is We Are Still Here. We're Still Here is a take on a haunted house scenario, plus the parent can't let go of their dead kid scenario, but it's done in a different way in that it is very slow-paced and tension building, and it's not relying on jump scares, except for the last act of the movie where there's not jump scares, but just full-on terror because everything is just breaking down. And I felt it was very effective because it was very visceral, and the beginning of the movie being more a slow burn tension kind of horror, and then contrasted with this big blowout at the end. I thought it was a pretty cool movie. Number 9 is Insidious Chapter 3. This is the third movie in the Insidious franchise, but it's a prequel to the first two chapters. I really love the first two chapters. They are kind of like your modern generic jump scary Blumhouse horror movie, but what they do differently is, and I don't really want to spoil it, but they have this plot of horror adventure where they go into this other dimension and they explore this other dimension and they see horrors there. And the second one especially has a very interesting plot, um, combining flashbacks and non-linear storytelling, and it ties into the first movie in an excellent way. So I went into the third chapter with very high expectations, but it didn't really tie into the other movies other than having the same characters as the Exorcists and telling the story of how they met. But still, the performances and the writing drew me in. The characters are great as usual, and Lee Whannell specifically is pretty amusing. And the main horror story was also serviceable, so I thought it was a decent movie. It's a above average Blumhouse production. If you know the Bloom movies, they make a lot of the popular horror movies, and this one was pretty good. Coming in at number 8 is Final Girls. Final Girls is a satirical take on the slasher genre. It's kind of like Cabin in the Woods in that sense, but done a bit differently because here the rules are going to be different. The main character is the daughter of a slasher flick actress, and her mom is dead, and she watches the movie that her mom made, and due to some weird bullshit movie circumstances, they actually get pulled into the movie, and now they know what's going to happen in the movie because they've seen the movie before, and they know the slasher tropes, and they just try to stop the slasher from happening. And it's a very interesting take on the slasher genre, and it's visually very interesting. It has a retrowave aesthetic like a lot of the independent horror movies from this year and last year, and it's full of charming actors and actresses, and it's just a very fun time overall. Coming in at number 7 is Krampus, the Christmas horror flick that is very similar to the Gremlins movies of past. So I went into the Krampus movie with low expectations because these types of movies these days aren't generally very good. But in the end, I was actually very happy with how it turned out. The use of practical effects, the just the right amount of humor, the overall look and feel of the movie, it was all very, very well done. It had heart, and that's a lot more important than a lot of other factors, including budget for me. And it wasn't really scary. It had some kind of creepy moments, but it was more of a horror adventure type of movie again. And overall, I think it was a very enjoyable experience, and I would say it's an essential Christmas movie. Coming in at number 6 is Crimson Peak, Guillermo del Toro's newest flick. So people who went into Crimson Peak with expectations of a traditional horror movie were certainly going to be disappointed because the movie is less a horror movie and more a gothic romance in a horror backdrop. And the movie is actually very enjoyable. It is visually extremely pleasing. Tom Hiddleston's performance and Jessica Chastain, everyone in the movie does a great job. And it's it is fairly predictable, and the ending is not really very interesting, but overall it was just a visual treat, and seeing more Guillermo is always great. It was more in line with his older stuff like Chronos in terms of how much horror there is. Basically, it's more of a character movie, but it has a horror setting, so there we go. Coming in at number 5 is Maggie. Maggie is a low-budget horror movie featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, so Arnold Schwarzenegger is in a character study where he is he's a guy who lives in a small town, and his daughter has contracted the zombie virus. Zombies are a thing in this movie's universe, and there is no cure. People are gonna die from the zombie virus, and Arnold's daughter is gonna die. This is not really a spoiler. And so he does not want to let his daughter go, and there are facilities they take people to where they're zombies, and it's kind of like an allegory for mental institutions, and zombies are treated very poorly in those. So Arnold doesn't want to see his daughter go into one of those institutes. So he decides to take care of her in her last few days, and it's all about character, and that's what really makes the movie great. It's a very intense movie, and Arnold's performance is actually great. He doesn't have a lot of lines, but all the acting he does is with his face, and he does so much with his face. I did not know Arnold had this in him. I'm a big Arnold fan, but for his action stuff, and I didn't think Arnold had the chops to pull off a deep, intriguing character study, but he did, and it's great. Coming in at number 4, we have Goodnight Mama, an Austrian horror flick. This movie is kind of hard to describe without spoiling because it's a very singular movie. Um, so this mother lives in this mansion in the middle of nowhere with her 2 kids, twins, and she has scars on her face. She's probably burned, so she's wearing this mask made of bandages, and she's taking care of her kids, but the kids, there's something off with the kids. And maybe there's something off with her as well. And this movie doesn't have a lot of necessarily intensely scary scenes, but it has some very, very tense scenes where you don't know what's going to happen at all. And the characters are really what carry it here again. You can probably see the theme here. And it has some very creepy stuff near the end especially. And there's this point in the movie where you think there's going to be a twist and you think you guess it, but then it throws a curveball and you're like, wait, what? And then your complete outlook changes, and then it keeps messing with you, and at the end it's up to you to decide. Coming in at number 3 is indie horror darling It Follows. So you've probably heard of this movie. It's been very hyped, and it's probably the most talked about indie horror movie of the year. So It Follows, I think, is a great, great horror movie that sorely disappointed me. And that might sound a bit contradictory, but let me explain. Because It Follows, it has all the makings of a great horror movie. It has a cast of characters who are all unsure of themselves and unsure of their situation. It has a monster that is undefeatable and tense but not overly gorily scary. It has great directing that emphasizes the strength of what a horror movie should be, tension. It has great music, very great retrowave music, and just generally amazing set design. But what it does right for the first 3 quarters of the movie is it builds amazing tension with these scenes where you see it. It is a thing that follows them, these teenagers. You get it by having sex with someone who's cursed by it, and then it passes on to you. And if it kills you, it moves on to the next person. And it's basically an allegory for STDs and the teenage anxiety of coping with sexual relations. Um, so yeah, it has these amazing shots where you see this like long, long take, and far, far away you see this person, and they're slowly coming towards the character, and you're like, is this the creature or is this just some person walking? And it really messes with your head. But then in the last act of the movie, it kind of just goes batshit insane. It breaks all of its own rules, and it goes from a tense horror movie to this weird action thing that makes absolutely no sense, and then it just falls apart. So that's why I thought it was pretty disappointing, even though I really liked it. I mean, it's number 3 in my list. Overall, it's a great movie hampered by a weird ending. Coming in at number 2 is the Iranian horror movie of the year, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. This movie is a very interesting movie because it's entirely in black and white, has very little dialogue, and it's takes place in Iran, and it plays on the whole sexual oppression and repression of women and how they're viewed in society, and also how interpersonal relationships work, and then puts that into a setting of vampires. Well, mostly one vampire, and you see this lady who's trying to cope with her situation in her life. She's the vampire, and she meets the main character, and they start building a relationship. It's actually reminiscent of Let the Right One in kind of some senses. It's again not necessarily a full-on horror movie, but it's a relationship movie that takes place in a horror setting and is very macabre. And it was a very evocative movie. Um, the acting was great, and the music was incredible. It featured a lot of rock music from the classics of rock era because that's what she likes to listen to. And overall, it was a very powerful movie. And I have to admit that I kind of have a soft spot for movies that are very style heavy, that also have substance, and this movie was just that, and I really, really loved it. I definitely recommend seeing this movie. And number 1, my favorite horror movie of the year. Again, it's not a full-on horror movie. It's What We Do in the Shadows, the horror comedy by Jermaine Clement and with Taika Waititi. And they're known for the New Zealand comedy musical show Flight of the Conchords. So this movie is just great. It's about a bunch of vampire dudes of varying ages. One of them is extremely old, one of them is like from the Victorian era, and one of them is younger. They're living together in this flat, and it's in documentary style, and it's just hilarious because they're trying to cope with each other because they're all just weird in different ways, and they're also trying to cope with life in the city among normal humans, and it's just it all just falls apart in typical comedy fashion. It's hilarious. It's probably the funniest movie of the year for me, and it's just they do so much creative stuff with this, and the music is also great. The soundtrack of the movie is incredible as well. And overall, this was my favorite horror movie of the year. So thank you for watching, and I'm gonna be doing my favorite sci-fi movies of the year next. So hopefully you'll check that out as well, and please let me know what you think. Bye.